Shubir, very much, very welcome to our podcast on sustainability. And thanks very much for also agreeing to appear on our first series of podcasts where we have chosen a topic, sustainability. So I'll first like to give a quick introduction of you, though I don't think anywhere here in the corporate sector in India or in the Eastern world they really need your introduction. But just as a process of formality, I have to give your introduction. You have spent around 40 years in the various capacities in several organizations, of which more than 25 is in Exide, where you rose from the level of general manager to a managing director and CEO. Additionally, you chair the boards of several subsidiary companies located in India as well as abroad. You qualified as a mechanical engineer from a very prestigious institute, IIT Madras, in your BTech in 1980 with distinction. So it shows you were academically also quite brilliant as you have done professionally as well. And after working for 2 years as an engineer, you enrolled yourself in another premier institute, IIM Kolkata, to pursue your postgraduate program in management, completing in 1984. And of course, as I also personally know, and many people know here, that you were deeply involved in the various chambers and the business bodies, and you have been the past president of the oldest chamber in the country, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You are a National Council member of CII also. You have received several accolades and awards during your career, including the India Energy Storage Alliance IESA Lifetime Achievement Award in May 23, and the other one where I was lucky to watch on the social media and the screen when you were accepting that award as a Distinguished Alumnus Award from IIM Kolkata in November 2023, and where I must say you made a 15-minute extremely impactful talk on sustainability and climate. And that actually motivated us to have you in our podcast on sustainability. You definitely remain interested in academic pursuits and have been a guest faculty at several reputed management institutions. Thanks, Subir, once again for coming here to Inturi's podcast. Inturi, just as a quick introduction, is a broad management and strategy and technology consulting firm operating for now around 4 to 5 years. And I started it with around 20 people. Many of them are your students from your institute. In fact, most of them are students from your institute. The topic that we chose today is sustainability. The relevance of the word, as everyone knows, is tremendously high. It's been started long back, but it has still not lost its relevance. There are definitely discussions, whether it is a short-term thing that we are trying to achieve, whether it will stay in the long term, how the profit and sustainability could be balanced, how the profit, planet, and the people, the 3 Ps, how all three could be balanced, whether small vendors will still be able to continue their sustainability drive, or whether it is only for the big people, whether it is only for the rich countries and not for poor countries. So there are definitely a lot of discussions happening around this, but the topic itself is definitely at the centrality of any large corporates, small corporates, or mid-sized corporates, regardless of the sector that they may be in, or regardless of the country that they. With this, I now get into some of the questions which have been in our mind. These questions are not just in my mind, these questions are in the mind of the other corporates also who would love to know from you as such a senior practicing professional. The question starts from a little broad or a little higher, broader edge to then goes to some of the more specifics. The first one is on your take on the points which have been discussed around this subject in the WEF Davos 2024, the recently concluded one, where we also heard the new term that was coined was more regeneration, the regenerative. They're saying that the resilience or some tweaking to enhance the resilience will merely not do. People will have to go for a regenerative strategy, regeneration of the supply chain to take into consideration the sustainability drive. So I would really like to pause here and take your overall views on the points discussed in the WEF 2024.
So before I start, thank you, Ambarish, for that very flattering introduction. Uh, Now coming to your question on regenerative uh, sustainability. Essentially, I'll try to make this concept as simple as possible for the audience. See, regenerative sustainability is, when we talk of sustainability, standalone sustainability, we are trying to uh, remedy or trying to correct certain things which we have not done in the past. So if we have been polluting, we stop pollution. So that is sustainability. When we talk of regenerative sustainability, you are also trying to remedy things which you have done wrong in the past. So essentially, to put it briefly in more technical language, regenerative sustainability goes beyond simply preventing further damage caused by human activity. It is not only strives to remediation, but it also ensures any future environmental degradation is avoided. So if you look at it, from a very simple point of view, when you are doing less bad, which means that whatever you are doing previously, you are not doing now. You are cutting trees, you are not cutting them now. So that is doing less bad. To doing more good, that is regeneration, which means that you not only do not cut trees, you also plant more trees so that you bring back the situation which existed many years earlier. So this is the concept of regenerative, because people have realized that just pursuing sustainability is not enough to correct the situation as it exists presently. They need to do something more so that they can enrich the environment, the situation with the water and everything else that humankind has to a large extent destroyed, so that we are able to come back to the earlier situation. So this is the concept of regenerative sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you. You bring in a definitely a new dimension that preserving the present sustainability is not good enough. That how do you really look into the future and take more steps and regenerate our strategy, regenerate our activities and supply chain in the newer perspectives. My next related question on that is this sustain, and I know you personally also, so I know how you are so passionate about the subject of sustainability. So I think you are the right person to answer this. That do you think, as the naysayers sometimes ask, mention that sustainability is a subject of only some immediate impact. I mean, it will actually go away in the long term. Corporates will not continue to be serious on this. They will more switch towards their profitability at the cost of sustainability. The balancing of the two definitely is not easy. Shareholders will be more clamoring for sustainability. And on the additionally, the poorer countries are not still attuned to it. Poorer corporates are also not so much attuned to it. So therefore, it will really have to work hard in a strong, permanent position in the world's business. Is that correct? I mean, do you agree to that? Disagree to that, and your views on that?
So let me start right at the beginning. See, why has this topic suddenly become so important? 25 or 30 years back, this topic would not find any mention in any public forum. But today, every public forum includes a session on sustainability, particularly in the corporate world. So why has this become important? Now, if you look at the Global Risks Perception Survey, which is released by the World Economic Forum just prior to the Davos Summit every year. Now, if you look at a 2-year horizon, then the risks are ranked from the most severe to the less severe, the first 10 risks. Now, if you look at a 2-year horizon, the number one risk as identified through insights from almost 1,500 global experts and facilitated by WEF. The number one risk is misinformation and disinformation. And number two risk in terms of severity is extreme weather events. Now, if you look at a 10-year horizon, then the same report says that the number one risk becomes extreme weather events. So extreme weather events has graduated from number two to number one, and misinformation and disinformation has come down the rank of severity to number five. So somehow extreme weather events finds mention in the perception of global risk as people imagine the way it will play out in the future. Now, why is this so? If you look at some of the reasons, you know, historically speaking, I'm giving a little bit of a historical perspective because this is important. You know, humans have inhabited this earth for nearly 200,000 years, existing as hunter-gatherers. Around 12,000 years ago, humans were able to master agriculture, which led to stable, sedentary social living. But this caused less than 1 degree Celsius change in average temperature of the earth. This 12,000 years caused less than 1 degree centigrade change or rise in the average temperature. But if you look at the last 200 years, when the Industrial Revolution has taken place, we have seen rise in global incomes. We have seen energy use, water use, paper production, transportation, telecommunications. And this period is also referred to as the Great Acceleration, where we have, along with all this development, what we have also got on the negative side is increase in emission of greenhouse gases, ocean acidification, loss of tropical forest cover, terrestrial biosphere degradation, unprecedented rise in living standards and comforts with an unparalleled assault on the natural environment. And during this period, the global population has also increased from around 1 billion to 7 billion, and it is still rising. And it is expected that it may touch 10 billion very soon. So I think the time has come for humankind to take a step back and rethink. This, I think, is very important. And it is in this context that sustainability becomes very important, because we now have come to this realization that we are heading towards perhaps a situation which cannot be remedied if we go further down this road at the same pace. So that is why it has today suddenly people are realizing that sustainability is something that we cannot avoid. Now, again, if you go back to the 70s, there was a famous British chemist by the name of James Lovelock. He propounded this theory of the living earth, and he called it the Gaia hypothesis. Gaia is the Greek goddess of the earth. So this hypothesis postulates that the earth is a living planet, and therefore the earth adjusts itself to various changes which are taking place in the environment with the objective of preserving itself. It is almost as if the earth is a living entity. And many people have said that some of the things which we have seen in the recent past in terms of extreme weather events and coronavirus and so on and so forth, it is an effort by the earth to rebalance itself from the position to where the humankind has taken this earth. Now, unfortunately, we are just one of the species living on this earth. And there are many other species which existed long before we came onto this earth, and many have become extinct. However, humans are the only species which today say unequivocally that this earth belongs to us. And we find nothing wrong with that statement. We say this earth belongs to us. Do not think this is a correct statement. It should be put the other way around. We belong to this earth. If you make this statement in this fashion, you will see that there is a need. When we say we belong to the earth, it automatically means that so many other species also belong to this earth. And therefore, when you make this statement, then you are looking at this entire question very, very differently. And therefore, there is a need to create a sense of balance, to live in harmony with everything else that is there on this earth. I think this basic philosophy or this basic need, basic approach, this needs to sink into the human species so that we are able to ensure the continuity of this planet. Planet might continue, but we have to ensure that this earth is able to provide for all these species which exist on this planet in the times to come. So, coming back to your question, whether organizations or corporates are taking this seriously, how serious are we about sustainability? So, if you ask my personal opinion, I think people are somehow coming to the realization that this question cannot be avoided, because the corporate world is fueled by the profit objective. And somewhere this perhaps is a little bit of a distraction at this point in time, but people are realizing that we cannot postpone this question for too long. However, many people ask this question that, what is stopping the world or the corporates or the various political entities to address this question of sustainability more aggressively? Why don't we do this? So, if I'm borrowing this from one of the books of Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee and Esther Duflo. They've written a book called Poor Economics, which is quite famous. And they have tried to identify why poor remain poor. What are the issues? And one of the things that they have been able to decipher or come out from their research is that there are 3 I's which actually come in the way. The first I is ideology, second I is ignorance, third I is inertia. So while reading this book, I think this concept of 3 I's is equally relevant in many areas, including sustainability. I will only tweak it a little by saying that instead of ideology, if I may use the word illusion, which is another I. So the question, what stops us from addressing this particular subject more aggressively? And I say that it's the 3 I's which are stopping us. Illusion. Why illusion? Because we are under the illusion that if things continue the way they are, then somehow things will happen correctly. And it's like putting our face in the sand and imagining that nobody can see us. It's that kind of a concept where, we just continue to do whatever we are doing and things. It is an illusion. Ignorance, because many people today are not really fully aware of the impact of what we are doing to this earth. And there is a fair amount of ignorance which exists today in the minds of many people, both literate and illiterate. And last but not the least, we know everything. We know what we have done. We know what we need to do, but there is a sense of inertia. which exists, that, change is always difficult, no matter what kind of change you're talking about. So what is stopping us from pursuing it more aggressively? Three I's. To my mind, fits in very well. And I borrow this from their book, which I think certainly can be applied in different and larger domains.
Very nice. I think this was a really good summing up of the uh, answer to the question of the three I's as you brought it. So that's very much true. And definitely, while the art does its own self-correction to a large extent, we should not also be intensifying the art's problem, putting more pressure on art's own self-correcting measures. The next question is a little coming from a selfish interest, as I have been a lifer in consulting, and you, as a professional in the corporate, have interacted, I could presume, with most of the leading consulting firms in India. And we as a consultant, when being given an assignment in such an ESG kind of work in an organization, we do take a slightly a kind of a view. We go through some specific steps in order, a linear view. We do a baseline assessment. We do therefore the materiality impact. We also work out the mitigation and the remediation measure. We attach a capex and an opex to those measures, short term, long term, mid term, long term. We link outcome to the returns. We simultaneously also take into consideration the compliance procedures and all that. Is that a right approach that we take as a consultant while suggesting or managing the environment drive of a client, or a much more transformative, much more all-encompassing, not such a conservative sequential steps that one should be taking that generally a consultant should bring in?
So my take on that is that, if you follow this linear approach, of course, you are doing your assignment, but if you were to look at it from the point of view of regenerative sustainability, which we have discussed a while ago, then I would say a zero-based approach may be more appropriate. Although it may not be desired by the client, but there's no harm in following a zero-based approach. So by zero-based approach, what I mean is today, if you were to make that factory or that plant, wherever it is situated, or that office, taking into account all the concerns that we have today on sustainability, how would we go about doing that plant? For example, what I have set up in 1950, they were fueled by different kinds of expectations and requirements. But when I'm doing a plant today, some of the things I'm thinking immediately are, green power and so on and so forth, and ZLD, and all these things immediately come to mind. So I would suggest that as a consultant, if I were to do the job of a consultant, I would adopt the zero-based approach, and I would map out the things which I would do if I were to do that, build that plant starting today. And then I would map out the points of deviation from that ideal situation. And the third stage would be then how to bridge this gap. This, I think, would be more meaningful. And although all the deviations, it may not be possible to bridge all those deviations for various reasons, but at least then the client would know that this is where the gap exists, so that in future, whenever there is a possibility, then he or she can look at that and see how to bridge that gap. So this is the approach which I would adopt, but I have never worked as a consultant, so I do not know how clients would take to that. But I'm speaking purely from a point of view of, if I may use the word, as a warrior of sustainability.
So you are on the other side of the table. So what you say would be more important to the consultants than what consultants on their own feel about it. So you are right. I mean, the baselining, because of this regenerative concept, which you said, Davos said, possibly needs to be not exactly the baselining on what they have, more the baselining on the zero-based situation, and then move into the gaps and mitigation measures. Agree. Uh, should we, by a little bit of changing course and moving into the different areas, we're also hearing that the technology now playing a huge role in environment and in sustainability measures of the corporates, analytics, technology, incorporation of much more sophisticated modern technologies, the IoTs, the AR, VR, all these things also play a huge role, which is now also changing the definition of the Industry 4.0 and making it call, I mean, all these are terms anyway, Industry 5.0, but just not really getting into the terminologies of all these things. Do you see a big role of the new information technologies, AI analytics, the various kinds of devices to play a very effective role in upholding the environment measures of corporates?
I think the kind of digitalization possibilities which exist today from first-hand knowledge, that I think this can play a great role towards the cause of sustainability. Just to give you an example, today, uh, through real-time data, which is available on the shop floor, it's possible to reduce wastages. It is possible to reduce the energy content in your entire production process. So with some of these measures, it is possible to do a proper regulation of the water usage in the plant. So all these are now present possibilities. However, it requires effective digitalization so that the information is available on real-time basis, so that your adjustments to the thermostat, to the flow, and so on and so forth, whatever systems you have in your factory, if they are done on real-time basis rather than with a lag. The earlier systems were that, for example, one would have to observe manually and see, okay, something has gone out of line, so therefore you set it back. But you have already lost by then, so much of wastage has been created, or so much of extra energy you have used. But with real-time interventions, which are possible with effective digitalization, you can certainly save a lot. And that, I think, goes towards sustainability, because whatever is wasted in a factory, in most factories, it goes for rework, which means you use more energy to rework. It's not effective production, it's basically correcting what has gone wrong in the production process. So therefore, you use more energy without the commensurate output through reworking. And in terms of energy and so on and so forth, it has a direct linkage. So therefore, I think these, whether you call it Industry 4.0 or 5.0, 5.0 is nothing, I mean, it's just an enhancement of 4.0, along with all the facets of 4.0. You also, include the human factor in 5.0 in order to understand the interactions of humans with robotics and machines and so on and so forth. So I think this is a great facilitator, actually, if properly used in manufacturing systems.
Yeah, right. Of course, I mean, those are, but one would tend to see that if organizations at a smaller scale who are not able to afford such technologies, I mean, maybe they have to stay without the technology, but still be on the course of environment till they can gradually keep on getting into the technology-induced environmental measures. But
See, actually, Ambarish, now the way I look at it is that, the smaller companies, particularly SMEs, today, through effective digitalization, they can become globally competitive. So I think there is a real potential which exists today for the small sector and even for the tiny sector, because once you go through this process, you become on par with the rest. You
Yes.
don't have to really then depend on individual manual expertise to develop, or particularly size and scale. Those things also to a large extent you can address. If you can address, do this. And it is so important today, again, I'm speaking from first-hand experience, that I think the government ought to have, for example, we are having so many schemes which are run by central government and the state government in order to facilitate various industries and various classes of industries. So I think for the SME sector, I would strongly recommend that the government uh, looks at some kind of an assistance scheme allowing these sectors to draw upon this subsidy to digitalize, because this can make them globally competitive. Today, in our state, we have a very large concentration of SMEs, and many of them suffer from lack of global competitiveness. I think this is one way to make them competitive. So this is something which cannot be, again, like sustainability, cannot be reversed or ignored, because the world today is going towards levels of digitalization, which and the pace uh, with which it has, and the pace is absolutely startling in the last 2 to 3 years. What has happened? It has not happened in my whole lifetime. The kind of revolution which is taking place in the digital space. So it is as if the digital framework of the company today has become the real framework. The physical framework has become somewhat secondary to the digital framework. That this is the direction in which we are going, and particularly with more of AI, this is going to gather pace. So this is something which I think if the SMEs require assistance, I think the government should have some kind of scheme or subsidy to assist this sector.
Very well pointed out. Yeah. In course of one of our assignment and research that we carried out, we figured out in some countries,
Hmm.
in the government is also actually making the incorporation or inclusion of technology, the industry 4.0 or 5.0 amongst the MSMEs or SMEs in a cluster with many companies, such companies coming together at one place, with government is funding the initial and they also have a payback system from the corporates to the government also, but it's being done in a collaborative cluster. Very well pointed out. Moving now to the another area of investment and customer, the investor and customer. I mean, we are also seeing from the market by talking to people, our own research also is showing that there is a new burgeoning set of investors, well, in these impact investors who are more focused on the purpose, values, particularly the environment aspects, the steps that the companies are taking. And we are also finding out that the discerning set of customers are coming up. More discerning set of customers are evolving. I mean, younger generation who are also very much focused on the environmental steps that the corporates have taken while choosing their products. I mean, mainly in the B2C kind of thing, products. Do you also see in your interaction as your chamber head and in the various corporates, financials that you interact with, do you see that trend?
That trend is certainly visible, particularly from my experience with meeting investors. I can say that a group of investors is emerging today globally, which look at your sustainability CSR kind of data, and then look at your financials. So that is emerging, and that is the numbers are increasing. Although everybody is not on the same platform, but there are certainly a group of investors which will not touch you unless you meet their basic criteria on these parameters. In terms of customers, yes, that customer set, particularly global customers, they have different kind of requirements. Apart from factory standards like ISOs and so on and so forth, many of them are also wanting to know other information regarding sustainability, child labor, and so many other requirements. So this consciousness is certainly growing. I only wish that the acceleration had been much more than what it is today globally.
Right. Yeah, you are true. I mean, we were correct. I mean, it's very true that we are not today picking up the other two dimensions in this discussion, the S and the G in the ESG. We are only focusing on E. We are not also having in this discussion anything on the DEI, but those are also important factors now, in addition to the environment part. Moving to more to the regulatory compliance, and also to some extent on an advocacy of the changes to the regulatory side. I mean, how much of this India situation do you think, in terms of sustainability, is more compliance driven than really having a self realization of actually taking and right action into it? And we also see India as well as globally, there are multiple standards. Like we have our BRSR, then we have globally TCFD, GRI, World Bank's own IFC standards. Then we're also hearing about the various, not exactly standards, but rules and regulations coming from European Union called CBAM. So therefore, there are multiple such policies, regulations, depending on which country you are working in or will be working with. You have to possibly be driven by multiple such guidelines. You have to be compliant to that. In fact, this came up also in the World Economic Forum, that can a consistent set of compliance and such checks across all the countries be created. So do you think we are actually becoming, our countries more, because of the compliance factors is playing a bigger role here, or is there a need to really bring out some common standards across these various measures? Your thoughts on this regulatory side and any advocacy that we should be making to the standard setters?
See, commonality of standards certainly help. There is no doubt about it. You are correct. We have multiple standards to contend with. See, as far as corporates are concerned, is everybody is on the same level in terms of what they have to comply with, then I would imagine that they would accept it more readily. The problem is that, you know, in some places, the regulatory requirement is not that strong. In other areas, it is very strong. So a disparity creeps in. I'm talking about a global situation. For example, if you are, because when you are trying to export, for example, the 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 country brand comes first before your product brand in most cases, unless you are a brand like Coke, or which are, you know, or Pepsi, which is kind of globally known. But in most cases, for most companies, the country brand comes first, and then the company brand comes second, because people always say, where is this product from, when you are trying to export? Now, if you have to be globally competitive, then the people you are competing with, whichever XYZ country, unless they are on the same platform in terms of compliance and regulatory measures, then it becomes an uneven competition or an unequal fight, because if some countries don't have to comply with the same standards, then you're not fighting from the same kind of platform, because somebody is having lax, let's say, compliance, so they can be, if I may use the word, be more competitive in terms of price. So corporates would not mind if globally we accept certain standards which are then equally applicable for all countries across the board, or at least for sets of industries. For example, if you talk about steel industry or cement industry or XYZ, whatever industry, if all the companies which are competing, if they have to comply to the same standards, because let's not forget one thing, compliance to standards, it costs money. And to that extent, you'll have to price your product accordingly. And therefore, that is where the companies have this issue with respect to global competition. Within the country, it should not make a difference if the regulatory mechanisms are watertight and they are then pursued vigorously within the country.
Right. So therefore, there is one way, as you have very rightly pointed out, the pressure from the financials, There's a pressure from the customer. There is a pressure from the compliance also. And there is, of course, a pressure from inside us that we really need to work towards it. Even against that, we are still seeing a lot of cases of greenwashing. And greenwashing is also becoming a challenge here. I don't know whether it could be more compliance pressures, which is leading people to some of the greenwashing. Uh, what's your thought? I mean, why is greenwashing proliferating? It's to impress a client or impress the regulator. What's the reason for such greenwashing to proliferate?
See, greenwashing is something that is bound to happen. The question is that how can we reduce this? Now, if the ground conditions are the same, for example, I'm giving you a simple example which is there in existing in our country. We have long range solar access and so on and so forth. But at the central level, the law is clear or the guideline is clear. But at the state level, it is very different. From state to state, it is very different. Now, somebody who is operating in a state which allows a larger proportion of green energy to be built into your overall energy requirements, and somebody who is operating in a state where this is not allowed or not allowed to that extent, then that particular industry would obviously feel the pressure because he is not able to access and therefore his costs are going up. So, as I have said, one easy way to reduce this kind of pressure is to have an equal platform for everybody. But unfortunately, in a federal structure, sometimes this is not always possible. But these are some of the starting points where the pressure builds in. Because suppose you have to compete against another company. Company A competes with company B, and company B, let us say, is located in a place where the environment is more conducive. You can pursue sustainability, and also to a large extent many of these things which fall within its ambit, they are more easily accessible and at lower cost. Then obviously company A would feel that pressure. And that is where this is the starting point of, we have used the word greenwashing and so on and so forth. So one easy way to do it, although I'm speaking very simplistically, I know this is not possible, but to the extent that we can reduce these disparities between various players, the ground conditions, to that extent, the need for greenwashing would be lower.
Yeah, you're right. A level playing field, possibly to an extent, will be working towards the reduction of the greenwashing. And while a customer also buys something from 2 or 3 different vendors, they may also make an assessment of the rules and regulations that each of these vendors are subjected to, whether they are all coming from a level playing field while they apply their evaluation. So yeah, this may actually.
Another thing we can do, Ambarish, is that, for example, now it is mandatory to print the MRP on the pack, any consumer goods. So I know everybody doesn't look at it, but many people do. And also the expiry date, that is also mandatory. Now, if we could bring out some such, thing connected with sustainability onto the pack, then people would start to look at it. Because right now, when I'm buying a pack of biscuit from company A, I do not have any means to differentiate that product from company B with respect to sustainable practices followed by these companies. Now, as a consumer, if I am very conscious about it and I would like to prefer buying the products which I need for my household from companies which pursue sustainability, I have no means to find out when I go to the shop. So is it possible for the government to now make it mandatory that, sustainability score or something like that, which can come on the pack? So then I can differentiate. Okay, product B may be slightly costlier, but okay, that's coming from a company which follows sustainable practices. So I prefer that brand. I don't have any means to do that. So I think some of these practices will certainly help.
That's a very good lateral take on this matter. And this will, of course, have to be very strongly audited, governed, certified by bodies. So that definitely will be wanting to create such bodies, which is also fine. I mean, that will also possibly enhance the country's standards at this environment. That's really a very novel suggestion. Moving to another factor which is also coming up from this compliance matters only, which is like the supply chain sustainability and relate. And also, I'm adding one more thing: the green adoption of the green technology. Now, the supply, I mean, the feasibility and how realistic these are. The supply chain sustainability, some compliance measures are asking us to check the vendors measure, the vendors measure, and this entire extended supply chain sides, the full measurability of there as a big organization. So any organization, they will have to look into that. And so that will that displace many small players from this entire chain? Is it possible for a corporate really to take a deeper look into the vendors' environment measures? Also, sometimes we're asking people to adopt more green technology in terms of the power consumption or in terms lesser power consumption, lesser carbon emission. And that may also require a lot of capital expenditure, complete regeneration of the production processes that we have, which you mentioned, of course, at the very beginning, that if I am an established factory 1950, take a completely zero waste look towards it. But then, even then, as of now, how practical and feasible do you think this entire supply chain sustainability and the green technology adoption would be?
So I will give you one specific example, which surprised me, but certainly I think is something that companies can look at. Today, last mile delivery of products of companies. Earlier the system was that the trucks would take it to the warehouse, and from the warehouse, again, the smaller trucks, the minivans or the mini kind of trucks would take it to the dealers or to whatever customers' premises and so on. Now, this supply chain in India, the last mile delivery, now today you have option to go green. Again, these are being run by small players. Huh? The small players are actually acquiring these electric vehicles, which have got unlimited accessibility to cities, and they can park, and so on and so forth. The corporations give them this facility because they are green. So now, if you use that, now one always associates sustainable practices with higher cost. But this is one example, which is a win-win situation. If you adopt last mile connectivity through electric vehicles, today the money you save, because it's cheaper, money you save from this conversion, you can use it to automate and robotize your warehouses. It's possible to do that. It's a huge cost saving, sustainable practice, allowing you the capital to modernize your warehouse. So there are various things like this in the supply chain which are undergoing transformation today, and there are companies which are, leveraging this to make their supply chain efficient, cost-effective, and modern. So it is not that the small people will lose out. Small people also, these opportunities are emerging today in the SCM space, and I'm sure it will reset at a different kind of level, but I do not think it will remove all the small players, because new opportunities are emerging in that space.
Yeah, and also there was another one, like your thoughts on the green technology adoption, like complete overhauling of the production systems, facilities to move into more greener technology, raw material substitution, production facilities, changing, revamping. Is that happening? How realistic that is, or are you seeing that happen?
No, in the context of supply chain, again, the modern factories today, if you look at ultra modern factories which are being set up now, internal logistics within the factory are all being done by robots or robotic vehicles. You don't have, people moving carts and things like that. That is all. You don't even have, overhead cranes in many places. You have just, instead of human beings, you have robots moving all over the factory, carrying and fetching things, and so on and so forth. So supply chain today also includes internal logistics within the factory, which is getting completely automated. In the near future, I don't think you will have. So essentially, this is at the end of the day, this will lead to greening of the factory environment, because ultimately, again, modern factories today are relying a lot on green energy. So ultimately, the power required to power these robots will come from green sources.
Thanks. I have three more questions. So,
Yeah.
with the last 10 minutes, one of the very important aspect in the circular economy, the recycling in the environment thing. There are businesses which are now modeling themselves to move as called pass. They're moving from a product to the service company, product as a service type of an organization. So there were a lot of experiments being done on such business model, operating model, supply chain model, but the focus is how to bring in the circularity, the recycling of the whole of the materials. Could be waste, could be scrap, could be byproducts, anything. Your thoughts and observations on that.
So I think this is one of the main pillars of sustainability. So you have raised a very valid question, because any process that we adopt, whether we are converting ore to, iron ore to steel, or any process, or bauxite to aluminum, we have to look at circularity. Circularity, without circularity, the process of sustainability is not complete. So therefore, any product or any process, whether it's plastics or anything else that we have invented or we have discovered or whatever we have done as a human species, we have to find out how to create a circular economy, so that, number one, you do not, because ultimately, if you are only going to mine, and there is a limit to what you can do, number one, and number two, it's an environmentally a very, very I should say, a process which really causes great harm to this earth. So therefore, the less we are mining and the more we are recycling, the better off we are. And that should be the objective in every manufacturing process. So, but unfortunately, today, recyclability is not, I should say, doesn't figure on top of the agenda when you are evaluating a business. Today, when you are evaluating a business, recircularity somehow doesn't come on top of the agenda. It is somewhere comes on the second or third page. That is something which should come on top of the agenda. So this is very important. Today, let me give you a specific example. There are a lot of articles today on how lead is very harmful to the environment and to human beings and so on and so forth. What is not talked about at all is the lead acid battery is more than 99% recyclable. It's a very, very friendly technology if dealt with properly. If you follow the full circularity route, it is perhaps one of the safest technologies to use. But that is not something which you find too much of mention in general media and press and so on and so forth. Nobody is talking too much about it. So it has to come on top of the agenda for every process. So this, I think, is very important, and this we can only neglect this at our own peril.
In fact, your this answer is also leading me to my next question. That in the battery manufacturing, I mean, generally in the whole industry of battery manufacturing, I mean, of course, everybody now knows the advantages of lithium, and therefore there is all very much uh, money being poured into the lithium battery manufacturing. So we all know the advantages of the lithium battery compared to the other non-lithium batteries. Also, and there are other batteries coming up with more advantages beyond lithium. Also, technology research is showing that. Uh, but we usually discuss the various advantages of the lithium battery as against the others, but we do not so much discuss on the overall carbon footprint of the whole lithium as against the other materials in the non-lithium side. You made a good point. So if you can slightly touch upon that, the lithium's carbon footprint compared to the others.
You see, press, of course, they report on subjects and topics which they feel will find takers in the with their customers. So therefore, they do not always report holistically. That is their business model. But if you look at it from a technological point of view, then cyclability, see, any chemical can be recycled. That is not the point here. Point here is that can you recycle it profitably? Is the recycling process viable? Today, if I were to take lead acid batteries, lead, it is possible to recycle, batteries back to lead profitably, in the sense that the cost of that recycling is not something which is, you can do it roughly at the same price as virgin lead, at the cost of, or in most cases, at a lower price than virgin lead. So therefore, it becomes a viable operation because you can recycle and you can get back your raw material at a price which is lower than the price of the virgin element or metal, and certainly in the worst case may be equal to that cost. So therefore, it becomes a viable business proposition. Now, for the other products that you are talking about, one has to establish this viability. It is certainly recyclable. Lithium-ion batteries are recyclable. There are recycling plants being set up. Now, in the long term, whether this recycling is something which is commercially, because ultimately that is also a business. And so therefore, the business proposition will have to be established. I'm not an expert on lithium battery recycling, but I'm sure if you have to embrace lithium ion in such a large manner all over the world, then we have to find out a viable process for recycling it profitably. Certainly, that is something that one has to address.
Right. My last question to you is, which is also a very discussed subject now, the carbon neutrality through the carbon trading, carbon buying, carbon selling. Now, while this possibly helps in a corporate to achieve their targets that is being stipulated by their country or by the regulatory bodies in their country. Now, there's also a view that it is also to an extent encouraging if I have money to produce carbon because I can settle it off or offset it by buying carbons from somewhere else. So what is your thought on that in terms of this carbon offsetting by doing the trading of the carbon uh, in the market?
The carbon trading is gradually being adopted because there are certain industries where still, from a technological point of view, it may not be possible to achieve neutrality in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. If you look at some of the targets taken by the various industries, you will see that the Indian Railways, for example, their target is to become carbon neutral by 2030. And this is, of course, stemming from the fact that at the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow in 2021, India as a nation has declared that we will become, as a country, net zero by 2070. And we have taken various targets in this connection. And there are um, various PSUs particularly have taken these targets, and they have, talked about it in media, that this is the target that they are taking. Now, we have asked that whether carbon trading is necessarily a good step in this direction, because then it induces some companies not to achieve neutrality faster than what it can or what it thinks it can. Now, my question is that, or my reply to that is that you have to start somewhere. So if ultimately at the end of the day, if you introduce carbon trading, that is going to cost money to a company which is going to buy those certificates, the so-called obligated companies, which are producing carbon footprint. That is going to cost some money. And this is, I'm sure, people are going to assess this within the various corporations to see that whether this is a more cost-effective method, or should I invest in capex and equipment to achieve a carbon neutrality on my own, or to so moment one starts buying certificates, this comes under the scanner, and I'm sure it will be discussed at the board level, that whether this is a better route, or should we then on our own try to achieve neutrality. I think this is a good point to start this discussion, because at some point in time, it is going to become costlier to buy those credits. So I think it is not a bad thing, and it is a good starting point for the country, because in any case, it will be very difficult, excuse me, for some of the heavy industries to achieve neutrality within a short span of time.
Yeah. So at least, I mean, there is a start to it. I mean, even if there is when you are actually having any kinds of reflection in your profit and loss, also that this much carbon you are actually spending on because of trading. So they could also raise questions from the shareholders that why are we spending so much money? So at least there is certain kinds of an exposure to all, and definitely, as you rightly mentioned, that it can be a starting point, which may gradually lead to their own organic carbon reduction measures than just by trading. I do come to an end, and if think if there are any other important points which you feel you would like to raise on your own, Subir, in this subject of sustainability that was not touched upon.
I think, Ambarish, by and large, we have covered most of the important topics connected with sustainability and green energy and so on and so forth. Uh, I think the time for discussion, although one can always discuss at a national level and at a global level, but I think the time has come for serious action, and on all fronts, on the part of nations, on the part of states, individual corporations, because I think time is running out, despite the hypothesis of the living Earth, and depending on that hypothesis, which is not yet a theory, it is just a hypothesis, to self-correct this situation, and any self-correction in any case will be extremely painful for the human species. Even if it were to happen, it would be extremely painful. So therefore, it is high time that that we as humankind, we take this situation very, very seriously, and individually, collectively, through various bodies, as corporates, as nations, we strive to accelerate the pace of regenerative sustainability, so that we can bring back the balance to this planet. Because at the end of the day, we have only one planet as of now.
Very good point. An observation, not just a question, which you can comment on. This drive towards sustainability, all the factors within it, lesser consumption, recyclability, can it lead towards a sentiment of minimalistic living because of the recyclability, lesser consumption, and therefore hampering the overall growth and prosperity of the world and make the economy flounder a little bit? Is there any possibility of that?
We have raised Ambarish, a philosophical question. So ultimately, if you look at this whole thing with a macro lens, you see chasing GDP today, which was considered a panacea at one point in time, really is proving to be deleterious. The reason being that GDP basically measures amount of goods and services consumed in an economy. It doesn't take into account sustainability. It doesn't take into account recyclability. So it also does not take into account income disparities. So now the question is, what are we striving for? No, my question is very simple. Today, the world GDP is about 112 to 115 trillion US dollars. Suppose I am making this question that today, if globally we are able to double or treble the GDP, instead of 112, we make it 200 or 300 or 400 trillion dollars, will all our problems disappear? Now, to my mind, it is my personal opinion that if we are to graduate to $400 trillion US with the present situation that we have today, it will only make it worse. So therefore, this concept of pursuing GDP in its present avatar perhaps needs a correction in itself. I would strongly, recommend that we have a modified version of GDP which takes into account two very important factors, if not more. One is sustainability, and the other one is income disparities. Why income disparities are important? Because today, if the affluent feel they can leave the non-affluent behind, they are making a very big mistake. Reason being that the air they breathe is the same air that the affluent people breathe. You can't stop it, no matter how many barriers you erect between your house and those people living on the streets. Air that enters their lungs also enters your lungs. And therefore, at a certain level, it's all very common. So therefore, unless you are able to uplift these people, there is no way you will be able to build in sustainable practices, because these people at the bottom of the pyramid, their immediate order needs are very, very basic: food, shelter, housing. If those are not met, you cannot expect them to lead sustainable lives. It's not possible. The water which comes into your tap also flows through the pipes which run under their hutments, and any leakage means contamination. So it's not possible to exclude a large section of the population of this earth and then expect that the affluent will be able to live in peace and harmony and lead sustainable lives. Unless these people can be motivated to lead a sustainable life, you cannot lead a sustainable life. By you, I mean the more affluent lot amongst us. So therefore, income disparities are very important to be brought into the GDP equation. And we must, reorient ourselves at the way we look at what we are trying to achieve, because nations compete with each other on GDP numbers. That is well known. But My point is, if we have the right metrics and then we compete against each other, then it makes much more sense from the point of view of sustainability and everything else that comes with it. So why not have a different set of matrices and then let the nations compete? There's no issue. That will also be consonant with the saving of the planet, along with material well-being and everything else that comes with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is really the last point you mentioned is so important. And that is why the S dimension and the E dimension of the ESG, where the inclusivity comes in, is so intertwined. So we would really look forward to have another podcast with you on the related dimensions of this the coming under the S dimension. And therefore, all the goals of SDGs are there also so interrelated, and many of that you already touched upon. I mean, therefore, all these goals of SDG, which is some applicable to environment, some applicable to the livelihood, all these are interrelated so much that maybe we would look forward to your opinion on the S dimension and the all components of the SDG soon, maybe in another discussion with you. Now, I must again thank you, Subir, because you touched upon on a macro level of the environment with the economic policy to the nuanced areas of environment from a manufacturing perspective so seamlessly. Move from one end of the spectrum to the other in 1 hour so seamlessly. It's really very nice to hear these thoughts from you. You really moved very seamlessly across the entire spectrum of the environment. Thank you, Shubhi, so much for your time and for your words. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you, Ambarish, for this opportunity. It has been a pleasure.